Dino De Laurentiis called me after I made Class of 1984. It was very successful, and he said he wanted to make a picture with me, and I found this project Year of the Dragon that we developed. But then there was this movie that he offered me, Firestarter, and what had happened was John Carpenter was originally set to do it, and there was a script, actually, a John Carpenter script, but it had nothing to do with the book. He veered completely away from the book. And so De Laurentiis, he said, well, I have this project ready to go, Firestarter, instead of this Year of the Dragon we were developing, which he later made with himself later. And so this picture, he said the budget was $15 million, but this Universal didn't want to spend $15 million. I said, how much do they have? He said $10 million. I said, oh, to me, that's 3 times the budget of my last film. I said, I'd be happy to be the biggest budget I've ever had. There's no problem. Well, how can you make this huge epic for that? I said, well, in a non-union state like North Carolina, without all the unions, we can make it. And so, but we did a lot of scouting before that in Rome and in Texas and in Mexico, a lot of places we scouted. And we ended up, shooting in North Carolina. But that's how I originally got involved. I read the book, and it was a phenomenal book and very important subject. And I knew about these CIA experiments that, led to deaths and so forth in the 60s that they had done in college campuses. So it was a fascinating project to me. And what happened was then I got, De Laurentiis said, do you know a writer? And I had met Stanley Mann, who had written for me the sequel to Class of 84. And so I said, yeah, Stanley Mann would be great. And he had written, 50, 60 movies by that point, including The Collector. And so, we wrote the script, and we followed the book exactly. And, it was completely adapted from start to finish exactly as the book. So when Stanley Mann started the project, he in 3 weeks he had the entire script. Actually less than 3 weeks, and it was like 300 pages. And then we went through, and it was the entire book, and we edited it down to 120 pages. And Stanley Mann said, we can't turn it in yet to the studio. Let's wait a little longer, because if we give them the script in 2.5 weeks, they're going to think it's no good. So we're finished, but let's just hold on to it for a little bit so it looks like I spent more time. I said, okay. So we turned it in finally a week or so later, and the first thing Dino De Laurentiis said was, when I turned the script in, he called me in his office and he said, this just follows the book exactly. And I go, well, I said, yes, how much did you pay for the book? He said, $1 million. I said, well, that's right, that's why we used it. And then during the filming, before we started, Stephen King came down to the set, and there was a whole discussion with him of how to do these various things, like her hair flying and fists clenched, and how to make this firework and the nose bleeding. The producer was Dino De Laurentiis, and he's a fantastic person. I learned so much, and he hired he said, let's bring in a whole crew from Italy. So the DP and the gaffer and so forth, the whole crew, the art department, they came from Italy. And at that time, immigration was very easy to get permits, so we brought them all into North Carolina, which I found, and he had not done before a non-union kind of movie. So, I was very experienced in that. But we shot for 55 days, and, he was great to work with. And he would call me in. We worked 6 days a week, and on the 7th day, De Laurentiis would call in the morning. He'd say, come over now, we got to discuss the next week's shooting. And I go, oh man, this is like my only day off. And De Laurentiis said, well, you're the general. He says, the generals during a war never get a day off. The George C. Scott wasn't budgeted for a big actor in that Rainbird part. And so when he wanted to put George C. Scott in the movie, and he wanted all these Academy Award-winning people in the movie, so he, went back to the studio, and there was a meeting at Universal with Robert Ramey, was the head of the studio at the time, and we all went in there for this meeting, and De Laurentiis, he was such a great salesman. He said, look, George C. Scott won't, we want to pay him $1 million. We need the money from you, but it won't we can't promise that it'll increase the box office, But he said it'll give the movie a cachet of not just being like a low budget horror film. It'll look like, if that prestigious actor wants to be in it, it'll look like a much more prestigious movie, like The Shining was. Drew Barrymore, we interviewed many 8-year-olds to play that part, including the wonderful actress from Poltergeist, the little girl. And it was between her and Drew Barrymore finally. But Drew Barrymore was always kind of like the person that everybody wanted, and she was like famous from E.T. And she read for the part, and it was fantastic. And she met with us, numerous times, and she was always the person that we'd want for the part, and she did a fantastic job because there are not that many 8-year-old girls that can carry a home movie like this and work for 55 days. And it was a very rough shoot for a girl to carry a whole movie like that. The whole fire thing, we actually rehearsed all of the wind machine and that on the set, way before the shooting. She came down to North Carolina, and we filmed her in all of that, test filmed her doing all of these things to get that just exactly right with the wind and the hair machine and all that. It was all pre-practiced, like long before the shooting started.
No, I think they thought I was a very eccentric and strange creature. I was a very eccentric actor, I think. Something bizarre about me that seemed to appeal to the less well-informed, perhaps. So I did quite a few strange films like that, mystical films. I suppose one leads on to another, really, when you're casting. I mean, very often it's about lending verisimilitude to situations which are so bizarre that they can't really exist, perhaps, or very, very strange. And it's a challenge. Better than playing a bloody solicitor for the whole of your career, Firestarter. I must have been a child star when I played that, because it's so long ago. What was it, 1980s, was it? That's about nearly 40 years. I don't know. I remember very little. I remember Dino De Laurentiis I'd worked as producer. He was producer. I'd worked with him once before. I can't remember what it was. But he built these studios in North Carolina, I remember. Something to do with very acquiescent unions and things. Nothing to do with me. I just heard things like that. Anyway, there were the studios, and he asked me if I'd do this part. Very strange piece it is. I was the only English actor, which is a bit strange, and felt a bit vulnerable about the whole thing. And faces that you knew very well, brilliant people around you, and from past films. And I had this prolonged, quite a long speech, I remember. And there, on my right, I think, was George C. Scott scrutinizing me. And I had this longish speech. I thought, well, I better get this right first time. Anyway, I worked assiduously at trying to get something from it. And I delivered it, and I think I did very well. It felt rhythmic and no hesitations, and unfortunately, which was not a very bright thing to do, I delivered the last, and I said, "Cut, print, next." And I thought, I wish I hadn't said that. It was startling as a story, and I wondered if it would carry, if people would really take to it. But marvellous, the lovely young actress then playing the lead, which she did fearfully well, I thought. And a brilliant cast around me, undoubtedly a very, very fine cast. So that made it all okay, but the business of bursting into flames, as I said earlier, I think that The great test of an actor, it seems to me, is when you're watching a ghost appear, or when you're seeing somebody burst into flames or something. It needs all the energy and imagination you can conjure.
I was one of the few actors that was hired to be one of the people that got burned, a G-man, so to speak, a government man, the FBI guys, right, that were looking for this subversive group of people, and but all the other actors around me were really stuntmen, okay, that didn't have very many lines or whatever, that were, they would do a full burn, body burn, or whatever the different things that you see happening in the film. So what I learned early on in that film is that these were stunt people that are now a member of our union and everything else, but at that time they weren't, and they're a different character and different personality than just regular actors. They're a little bit more. They're like rodeo riders. There's a sense of like danger and adventure that they kind of have. In fact, I would go out with them in North Carolina to these bars, and I stopped doing that because they'd get into fights all the time. And I said, you don't understand. I said, if I get into a fight, and I said, my face gets all messed up. I said, I'm not going to work. So I'm with all these stuntmen, right? And they get paid so much per stunt, okay? And they negotiate per stunt, okay? With the producer usually. So I got like an arm burn on me, right? Where like they set, quarter of my body on fire. And the producer said, well, we're going to give you an extra, $300-400 to be able to, to do this and stuff. So I said, oh, okay, good, okay, right. And I went over to the stunt guys and the coordinator and the others, and they were all sitting, they all kind of sat in a group. And once I said, listen, the producers just come to me and they want me to do a stunt for them. And they want me to do an arm burn or whatever, whatever it was called. And they want to pay me this much money. And I said, is that a good price? Right? And they all kind of looked at each other slowly, one way and the other way, and they said, oh, yeah, that's an okay price. And I knew they were not telling me the truth. I knew that they got more money for getting burned the way I was going to get burned. But they weren't going to tell me that, That was their own like little, their secret society.
Working with Glenn Randall Jr. was fantastic. He was such a professional stuntman, and he designed a lot of these stunts that were done with the men on fire and people flying on trampolines on fire. That had never been done before, and diving out of the way of these fireballs. And he was an expert with horses, so he trained these horses for a month to run out of the burning barn. And he did a fantastic job.
George Wilbur and Gene Hartline are stunt guys that were all in the same stunt group, the Stuntmen's Association. And so I'd worked with those guys over the years in a lot of different jobs. Great people, good stunt guys, and that's the kind of people you want to have around you when you're doing that stuff for safety, or I'm safety for them if they're doing it. So it's a good atmosphere.
All those special effects are done on the set. There's no CGI when we made this movie, so everything was done right on the set. So when you see those fireballs, they're on a wire that you light them up and they fly through the air. That's really happening right in the set, and the stunt people had to dive out of the way of the fireballs. We built pipes through the ground, so the fire's moving through the ground and these flames. So there was a lot of very dangerous stunt work done in the movie, and a lot of people set on fire in special suits, and the whole special effects aspect of it was very complex.
It felt safe, which is not, there wasn't chaos. I mean, I've been on sets where there was chaos, and I mean, I'm sure there were problems. Mark will tell you what problems he might have had, I'm sure, but he somehow, that was kept from us, or it was kind of insular.
I remember a delightful, harmonious relationship with her, and of course that help through all the problems that one had. No, terrific. Yeah, fine. And deserved the fame he got, I must say. Yeah.
What a cast! What's just an amazing cast that they were able to put all those people together, and that they were available. That's usually, forget that, somebody's got the money to pay them whatever their rate might be or whatever, right? That they could put everybody together.
I thought it was a darn good movie. Martin Sheen, Scott, all of them, David Keith, Drew, everybody was great. And I thought Drew did an exceptional job for just a child, and she's just wonderful. I used to go in Drew's, the classroom, the trailer that she had classroom in, I used to go in there once in a while and sit and talk with her. And I asked her one day, I said, Drew, give me an autographed picture. She, what? And her mom, rather, got the picture, and Drew autographed the picture for me. And as you can see, it's printed, but it was so sweet. I just thought it was marvelous.
And the music helped in a lot of the scenes in Tangerine Dream, that they had done Sorcerer, and they were, quite famous group at the time from Germany. So, they were hired to do the soundtrack. And it's interesting, they did the whole score in Berlin, and then they sent, all of the music. But normally the music is geared to each individual scene. But what they did, I said, wait a minute, when it came in, I called them and said, well, this music, there's no numbering or coding where it all goes. And they said, well, just put it anywhere. It works in any scene, any place you want to put it. And that was true. So that wherever you tried this music, it worked throughout the movie in any scene. It was the most amazing thing with a score I'd ever heard of, that you just delivered like that.
Also wir müssen wissen, dass die Aufträge meistens über das Büro von Edgar gingen, weil er war mehr oder minder in dem Management am besten involviert. Ich war sozusagen eher derjenige, der gerne im Studio saß und sozusagen vor einem Monitor mit einem Videorekorder mir die Szenen angeschaut habe. Und wenn ich denn einen Zugang gefunden hatte zu den Szenen, zum Beispiel, wir reden über den Firestarter, hier über Motive oder Themen, die auf Charlie the Kid passten, konnte ich einfach mich hinsetzen, entweder einen klavierähnlichen Sound nehmen oder am Synthi arbeiten und über die Art von Improvisation zu dem Bild dann die Komposition zu finden. Ich habe also auch Notationen gemacht und. Sodass die Wechselwirkung zwischen Bild und dem, was ich dabei in Realtime empfunden habe, sehr, sehr direkt war, was mir immer unglaublich viel Spaß gemacht habe. Es gab natürlich nur ein Problem, wenn ich etwas hatte und ich durfte es nicht vergessen, das war das eine. Und das zweite ist, wenn ich nicht Zeit hatte, es zu notieren, musste ich es sehr schnell aufnehmen. Und so kommen auch Christoph und Edgar ins Spiel, die dann teilweise auch die Maschinen bedient haben, sodass, wenn wir zu dritt waren, einfach auch das, was wir gerade Realtime in den Fingern hatten, sofort auf eine Bandmaschine aufnehmen mussten. Ansonsten war es verloren. Wir hatten ja noch nicht wie heutzutage Rechner, in die du einfach spielst und die sich das merken. Du kannst es storen, du kannst aus riesigen Bibliotheken Sounds nehmen. Das war noch nicht der Fall. Also wenn wir etwas hatten, dann musste es sofort auf Band aufgenommen werden. Ich muss gestehen, dass ich in der Erinnerung keine so genaue Angaben darüber habe, wie wir mit Mark Lester gearbeitet haben. Was definitiv der Fall war, und das war aber fast bei allen Filmmusiken der Fall, dass wir mit den Musikeditoren sehr dicht, sehr eng gearbeitet haben, die teilweise 2-3 Wochen in Spandau waren und mit uns an den Musiken gearbeitet haben, die eben quasi unterrichtet und vorher mit dem Regisseur in Los Angeles genaue Instruktionen hatten, wie die Musik zu sein hatte. Und in diesem Falle kann ich mich noch sehr gut an den Produzenten Dino De Laurentiis erinnern, der nach Spandau kam, also in das Studio von Christoph, und da merkt man seine Professionalität, eigentlich nur 2 Musiken vorgespielt haben wollte. Nämlich das eine war für wahr. Und die ist immer noch so präsent in meinem Kopf. Ich müsste immer wieder schmunzeln, wenn ich drüber nachdenke. Wir sitzen in Spandau, bereiten alles vor. Musik ist fast fertig. Und die Tür geht auf und wir hatten eigentlich die Laurentiis erwartet. Und es kommen 2 Bodyguards rein. Ja. Das war für uns in dem Moment eigentlich unglaublich, weil wir wussten nicht unbedingt, wie Hollywood funktioniert. Natürlich war er dabei, aber es kamen erst die Bodyguards und die haben sozusagen kurz gecheckt, ob alles sauber ist im Studio. Und dann kam er rein, setzte sich zu uns ans Pult und erstaunlicherweise, aber da merkt man natürlich, wie professionell diese Leute sind. Er wollte nur 2 Themen hören. Das eine war, wir waren natürlich wahnsinnig aufgeregt, ob alles gelingt. Und als er die beiden Themen hörte, sagte er, okay, fein, er hat alles gehört, mehr braucht er nicht. Dann kam die Frage, wo gibt es hier in der Stadt die beste Pasta? Und wir dachten, das ist doch wohl nicht möglich. Wir haben hier wochenlang gearbeitet und er hört sich 2 Themen an und dann möchte er einfach nur die beste Pasta haben. Also hat Edgar ihn, glaube ich, ins KaDeWe begleitet und dort hat er, glaube ich, die beste Pasta in Berlin bekommen. Wir haben ihn uns angeschaut und wussten, er verlangt alles von uns, was wir überhaupt bis dahin sozusagen in der Bandbreite, in der Pipeline hatten. Er verlangt enorme Klangwelten, um eben die Fähigkeiten von Andrew McGee zum Beispiel oder natürlich auch diese Fähigkeiten des Feuer zu entfachen von Charlie bedeutet. Gleichzeitig war uns vollkommen klar, wir müssen Themen finden, wir müssen Klangfarben finden, die auf dieses 10-jährige Mädchen passen und können nicht nur brutal einfach irgendwie reinhauen. Ich weiß, dass wir damals ziemlich erschöpft waren, weil uns das wirklich in die kleinsten Kleinigkeiten gefordert hatte, dass diese Bandbreite an all den Dingen musikalisch abzudecken. Und ich glaube, ich wäre gar nicht in der Lage, neutral über diesen Film zu reden, weil wenn du 3-4 Wochen die Hauptdarsteller siehst, wenn du mit ihnen quasi lebst, wenn du, was sie durchmachen und Charlie the Kid ist ja vollkommen verzweifelt auf der einen Seite, auf der anderen Seite liebt sie ihre Eltern, ihren Vater und trotzdem hat sie diese Begabung, die sie gar nicht will, Feuer zu entfachen, Pyrokinese. Wenn du das alles über 3-4 Wochen so hautnah erlebst und durchlebst, hast du gar keine Möglichkeit, diesen Film neutral zu beobachten und ihn zu beurteilen, wie jemand, der vielleicht gar nicht weiß, wie das alles entstanden ist und der sich ins Kino setzt und sagt, oder so, oder ja, gut oder nicht oder so.
When I saw the finished film 40-something years ago, I don't remember. I remember it being very extravagant. Well, mind you, as a writer, he is extravagant, isn't he? People bursting into flames and things. Makes demands upon the viewer's imagination, it seems to me. And I think that's what I felt. A bit like 1 or 2 other films I've been in. You have to trust the punters, the audience, to contribute. I mean, it's part of their duty to contribute to a piece, play or whatever. They become part of it, or should become part of it. If they're not, then you've failed.